politics.
Hey guys, Keith and Rodney checking in right now. I am filming a panel called Government Gone Wild, hosted by Judicial Watch President Tom Finn.
Speaking for decades. But over the last 3 years, beginning with the bailouts at the end of the Bush administration, through the big government socialism put forward by the fanatics in the Obama administration, our nation has been in crisis. This administration and its leftist and statist allies see no limits on the powers of the federal government, but they do seek to impose limits on the ability of the American people to police that government. So we have the effective takeovers of the banks, the takeover of car companies, the takeover of the student loan industry, and the effective takeover of the mortgage market. And then there's the government takeover of the healthcare industry. The key to the healthcare takeover, known as Obamacare, is the individual mandate, which requires individuals to buy a product from a private entity. To quote the CBO from back during the Hillary Care debate, the government has never required people to buy any good or service as a condition of lawful residence in the United States. This unprecedented power grab makes a mockery of the constitutional ideal of a federal government with enumerated powers. Indeed, in overturning Obamacare a few weeks ago, Judge Vincent of Florida wrote, "If Congress can penalize a passive individual for failing to engage in commerce, the enumeration of powers in the Constitution would have been vain, for it would be difficult to perceive any limitation on federal power, and we would have a Constitution in name only." A Constitution in name only.
This is my first CPAC event. I'm really excited to be here, and it's exciting to be with true believers and friends. So I have good news, which you probably have already heard, but for the first year in my lifetime, it looks like we're going to have a year with spending bills coming out of Congress that are not chock full of thousands of pork projects and earmarks, which is a big victory, and a lot of people here this weekend and in this room have worked very hard towards that goal. So that's the good news. The not so good news is that the government's still completely out of control and wasting our money faster than we can keep track of it. I thought we might enjoy hearing a few examples of things that the government is currently spending money on. $20 million a year that we hand out in unemployment benefits to individuals earning over $1 million. The Department of Veterans Affairs spends nearly $200 million a year maintaining unused federal properties, including a pink monkey house in Ohio. Department of Defense loses nearly $4 billion a year in Iraq to corruption, and meanwhile, DoD is also funding bowling and golf conferences in Florida.
So as I was preparing for this panel, I was trying to think about the most egregious examples of government interference that I have on a semi-regular basis. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I did a lot of flying over the holidays and felt that I got an up-close and personal look at the TSA. And I would encourage you, as we talk about government accountability and transparency, to think about how different it was getting on a plane 10 years ago. 10 years ago was right after 9/11, and we had the president sign the Aviation and Transportation Security Act, which basically gave the feds direct responsibility for airport screening and created what we now know as the TSA. Initially we're like, okay, another government program. But think about this. In December 22nd, 2001, we have the shoe bomber. He is overpowered by passengers and crew, not by TSA regulations, and yet what do? Now as passengers, we have to take off our shoes when we board a plane. In 2004, you have 2 suicide bombers trying to blow up planes in Russia, and as a consequence of that, we're not allowed to take lighters on planes. And note, we are the only nation in the world to prohibit lighters from carry-on luggage at that time. In 2006, you have the ban on liquids, gels, and aerosols from carry-ons. And then in 2009, you have the underwear bomber, which consequently leads to enhanced pat-downs or groping, whatever you want to call it. And then you also have the advanced image screening or radiation. So basically, with all these government regulations, still the question is, do you feel any safer now boarding a plane than you did 10 years ago? I really don't. I just didn't like it.
The topic here is government gone wild. The government's gone wild on spending, the government's gone wild on regulations. I'm going to talk a little bit about each and tell you how they're connected. As most people know, unless federal spending is cut, it is going to ruin nation. Policymakers have to start cutting spending. They've got to start cutting major programs. They've got to start terminating agencies and whole government departments. Else we are going the way of Greece. So at Cato, we've got a website, downsizinggovernment.org, where we go through every federal department. We talk about where we can cut and what agencies to terminate. In addition to that, we need new budget mechanisms to control these politicians on Capitol Hill. You notice how the state governments over the last couple of years have generally cut and trimmed spending. Even liberal governors who don't want to cut have been forced to cut. And the reason is because all the states have either statutory or constitutional requirements that balance their budget every year. They are forced by mechanisms to control spending.
When Senator Coburn and then Senator Obama had a bill to require the federal government to establish a Google-like searchable online database of all federal spending, everybody in the Senate was for it, except one person who was anonymous and under the Senate rules could put a hold on it. So a group of us, bloggers and conservative activists and so forth, got together on the internet and using our blogs, we called every senator in town and said, "Are you the one?" And by process of elimination, we exposed the one senator who was holding up that bill, the Senator Ted Stevens. Nobody was surprised. But as a result of that, Stevens had to let his hold expire. The bill passed the Senate, I believe, unanimously. And it is today responsible for a website that you should know about, that you should be going to all the time. It's usaspending.gov. Now, the Obama folks have messed it up some in the 2 years that they've been here, but it still is an invaluable resource.
Lost half its value during that time. Okay? This is after the Central Bank supposedly had finally figured out how to run things. Okay, in 1984. So the dollar was worth 48 cents in 2005 compared to its 1984 value. This is probably a good job. You not emphasize that. In fact, if you look at 1914, we had $11 billion in the money supply, checking accounts and